Thank you, Niels. Thank you, Christina. For me, in this presentation, there was one really important message that I needed to take home. We see that if some countries and regions are racing ahead, then in Europe we are still in a kind of a well of disillusionment. We need to make technology work for our storytelling. We need to embrace the standards, and of course, we need to create the standards ourselves, as well as diminishing the fear. Fear has been also a big topic today, so we need to diminish fear towards technology and make that work for us in Europe. So today, we have talked about production, the content. We have also talked about industry alliances. We have talked about financing, and I think there is the last component that we need to cover, which of course is the big hype word, it's the IP. So hereby, I have a great pleasure to welcome our last panel before a very, very important keynote, and that panel will focus on the state and the opportunity for European IP. Kristen, I welcome you back with Wonsun Shin, with Grace Mahjarj and Sanjay Saar. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Sten. Welcome, everyone. As Sten mentioned, we're talking about the future of IP here. We're going to be branching out and going a little bit beyond there, and I want you to fasten your seatbelts, put your trays into the upright position, because we're actually going to be traveling into the future with this panel and determining how we can create a framework for Europe, for European growth, for the short term and for the mid and the long term. Joining us, we have three fantastic guests with vision and experience crossing Asia, Europe, the US, but also hardware, platforms, audiences, markets, IP. And we're going to be pulling out from them their insights, perspectives, and their candid opinions. Wonsun, you are a freelance consultant specializing in co-production projects, festival strategies, remake rights, acquisitions. You've just come straight from a film festival in Manila to join us here. Your superpower is fostering great global relations and contributing to a strategic evolution in the industry. Sander, you are a technologist and futurist. Joining us from the future, you're a mastercraft of products and strategies, based in the US on the West Coast, with working and driving innovation for Disney, Red Bull, and Moonbug. And Grace, you seem a long way over there, Grace. Yeah. CEO, Head of Business and Development at Arvet Agency Transmedia, and member of the board of the Swedish chapter of Women in Film and Television. You have a unique standpoint, and you're one of the few media entrepreneurs actually focused on intellectual property. Now, before we get into it, I'm going to do a very quick thought experiment with all of you. We've talked about the money, now we're thinking about the future. If I gave each of you, I'm not going to do this in real life, if I gave each of you 100 euros right now to bet on the future of the creativity audiovisual industry, okay, where would you put your money? Okay, would you put your money into the European creative and platforms, or into the non-European creative platforms? Okay, take a second and think about that. I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up, but whether you answered Europe or non-European, you need to listen to what these people are saying in order to secure your investment for the future. So let's start off by seeing what you have each experienced, seen, heard, witnessed that you consider to be a game-changing thing. What have you seen for the last 6 months? Wonsun, you've just come in from Asia. What's caught your attention and really shocked you as a game change?
People kept asking me since yesterday, because I'm Korean, and they're asking me about the Korean market. And I have to say, Korean market has been dismal for past, I don't know how many years, since Parasite. So I'll just jump straight to other successful cases of Asia. And notably, India is all we imagine as a light, which was the competition film in Cannes. And India has not had a competition film in Cannes for 30 years. So this was very significant. And not only that, the main actress also won an award. Also, going back to Korea temporarily, Exuma, it didn't perform as well as we had hoped in Korea, but at the same time, it was the highest grossing film in Vietnam and Indonesia. grossing 7 million each. So this is one example of where the domestic performance failed, but then it performed well overseas, which actually doesn't really happen often with Korean films. So that was a surprise. And the next are all like negative traits, so we'll get back to that.
OK, we definitely have a section there. Sander, what has caught your attention as a game change?
When you ask that question, especially over the 6 months, what has changed is the speed and capability, specifically around AI. When in the previous paradigm, compute power doubled every 18 months, what is known as Moore's law, then now every 6 months, AI capabilities are doubling. And that completely changes the adoption, but also the solutions that we have access to. So for example, like when the models before what you were using, for writing like ChatGPT used to only have like the system one thinking, like give you a quick answer to your questions and like generate onwards from that. This year, those models are able to think and reason and apply system two thinking, and that's a massive breakthrough. That opens up the path to having agents around us that can help us the same way as we work with people. We will be working with those agents, and that's already happening, and that has unlocked many, many other fields. If my day-to-day, there's self-driving cars now. That was a big unlock over the last 6 months. Most of the people, when you're driving a Tesla, you're not really touching the wheel, or you're taking Waymo, who's now taking more than 100,000 rides every week. Those things were not possible before. As we're doubling the capabilities every 6 months, that will unlock more and more of those capabilities. So 6 months in and of itself has been mind-blowing.
Certainly, and that move in 6 months from just generative AI and prompts to now the agents and actually having them do actions for us. Grace?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot has happened very, very fast and quick. But also thinking about this question, I would say a game changer was the November 4th election in the USA and how we saw the way the media landscape really shaped this election and the narratives in terms of where legacy media, what happened to legacy media and what happened to how the narratives went across alternative medias, which now are part of the mainstream. That shifted, and that really told me so many things about how consumers are looking at traditional TV, audiovisual, a demographic, citizens and consumers that were consuming what we have called alternative media, this assumption that they are not that important or wouldn't move the needle, actually, we could say definitely contributed to a change of government. And so for me, from an IP perspective, from a narrative perspective, this told me that we are in such a place where, the needle, this situation or these medias and media platforms moved the needle right across and broke the record, so to say. So for me, that was quite compelling, but also a generative AI in content creation, huge difference. And we've got, Saar, the ability to make videos, films today, the ability to, connecting with what Sander's saying, that has changed, and that has changed what IP means, in its conventional terms, and how IP will impact with generative AI.
And definitely this sort of merging across or movement of the audiences across the platforms, even within politics. There's something I want to share with you, which is that I've seen from France, where I'm based. We have Inoxtag, who's one of our leading YouTubers, 8.3 million subscribers, actually took some time out from his channel to produce a feature-length documentary, Kaizen, on scaling Everest. Where did he release that? He released it in 500 cinemas in France. It didn't go out on YouTube first. It actually went out, and he used the traditional cinema network to bring his public to him, own that audience. But through the cinema network, you got a special exception visa from the CNC to be able to do that. So I think we see now also content creators using the maybe even more traditional distribution platforms to move their business forwards here. Let's continue now and think about the emerging trends. So both the clear signals, but also those edge cases, those faint little radar blips. Let's bring them here and see what you think that we need to be aware of in order to build this future European framework. Sander, so you have this unique both US and European perspective. What do you think we need to take a look at?
I think a good frame of thinking generally, when you look at the signal in the noise, is what are the fundamentals that are driving it. And what internet allowed us to do, it completely democratized distribution. We were not dependent on the channel owner or the theater owner to put our content out there. And that's what Grace just said, what redefined elections, because finally any individual, whether they're a podcaster like Joe Rogan, are able to have a direct connection with their audience. And that has changed the level of access that we have completely. Now, what AI is doing, it's also democratizing creation, which is another core part of the content value chain. So if we go through each one of them, what the impact of AI will be, is in the content creation phase, it took you several hundred of thousands of dollars to get started, own a camera, studio, crew, etc., to the world that we live in today, where it just requires a lot less skill. You can use your phone to get started and open your content and put it on one of those platforms. We're moving to the world where you can use language to generate content rather than having any specific skill. So it will bring the cost and the barrier to entry to create content even lower, so we're going to have even more content around us. When you look at content distribution, the next step from that was previously limited to the number of executives who decide, whether they're in a film fund or they're in a TV channel board, who decide, you're going to get the money to do the show, but you will not get the money. We're now in this internet world where anybody and everybody is able to put their content out there, and we're moving to the world where more and more of that content is being generated on the fly. An example here would be, for example, Character AI or Meta AI Studio, where you can talk to either digital characters or even versions of physical characters in the digital world, and that is not predefined by a creator. This is all generated on the fly. And if you think about the content consumption side, that used to be limited to, you can put, let's say, 10 to 20 movies in a theater screen, to the 100+ TV channels that you choose from, to the world that we live in today, where we have those personalized, curated feeds based on our interest. And we're moving to the world where that will be hyper-personalized. Think if any of you have ever experienced Spotify DJ, for example, which is an experience that is not just a personalized playlist, but it's a generated experience where you have a personal DJ telling about your life stories in the context of the songs that you're listening to and bringing back tunes. Everything is generated hyper-personalized just to you. So it's not even the playlist or the feed that we will continue to follow. So those are the signals that I'm seeing that will be kind of building upon internet, not just democratizing content distribution, everybody having to have their own TV channel online on YouTube, but also democratizing content creation.
Okay. Wonsun, I know that you have this global perspective. I'm going to ask you to put your Asia radar on for us. What are the signals that you see coming from there that you think here in Europe we need to be aware of?
I think I told you in our private conversation beforehand that I probably would tell you the perspective from Asia looking in rather than Europeans looking at Asia in this regard. And I could tell you that many Asians have been collaborating with Europeans, and there have been many successful cases of them, the co-production, the multinational co-production films ending in Cannes and Venice and Berlinale. But I still feel that personally I was offered to work with Marché de Film this year and Hobart Balls. I know there are some of you who are probably saying that, oh, like I've been doing that for years, working with different countries. And yes, you are pioneers, but for our generation, especially for non-Europeans who work with European organizations or otherwise, it's still kind of rare. So I would also say that that's also a game changer, because there are a lot of people, a lot of consultants like me in the industry who are working with various organizations borderless. And that's also happening in production. And now government funds are trying to collaborate also. So there has been a lot of effort. It's just that Korea's case, they haven't really amended any of the co-production treaties. They were looking into amending it because it's a very old model and it doesn't really fit the contemporary co-production models, and nothing will be qualified as co-production under that criteria. So they're looking to change. And can I get back to you?
Yeah. Keep thinking, because I'm going to go across to Grace to give us a European perspective, but if anything comes up, we can come back to yourself, Grace.
Well, I mean, it's such an interesting, so we're talking about edge cases, right? Yeah. Again, I would say an edge case is exactly what happened in the USA, and how the markets, the traditional legacy media has now been challenged by, a multifaceted media platforms, but also, we talk a lot about distribution, but also about how we make our stories within these distribution platforms, if you like. That has changed because of audience engagement, because now we have consumers who are also creators. So these lines have been blurred. And suddenly, as connecting to what Sandra was saying, this has democratized how we make content. With the advancement of AI tools, etc., but also how we're using multi-layered content. For example, I don't know if you've heard of the documentary called Grand Theft Hamlet, about two actors, out-of-work actors during COVID. They decided to stage a play inside the ultraviolet game Grand Theft Auto. So they staged Hamlet, and the whole point was to really create the game, create the play without getting killed. And it ended up being a very interesting and humorous and compelling documentary. But what this told me was a couple of things, right? We had two players, real world players, use a platform to stage an IP, a theater play, Shakespeare, that connected to another public, another audience, a gaming audience that would not normally come to this particular story. And then it also connected these players outside to connect to a story that they would not normally go to. So this was really fascinating. But on another level, in terms of activation, this told me, wow, this is how we are going to start having brand. It'll be interesting to see what happens next. If this was a play, Shakespearean play on a gaming platform, what else is going to happen? Yeah. Are we going to start attending concerts? Will there be political rallies? Will there be, celebrity activations? It's dual use, right? It can be constructive storytelling or it can be destructive storytelling. And this is the power, that is agnostic to this technology. And that's really on us, how we want to frame policy with, keep leaning into that, being aware of that, understanding what those where this will go, and those potential. And it means that policymakers and lawmakers and audiovisual commissioners, etc., they need to have an imagination. They need to think beyond what we are seeing right now.
I love the example you give there of Grand Theft Hamlet. And in fact, what it indicates and what we see is the ability to move across and to create content, but to move it across the platforms out there. One of the things that I've seen and many of my friends are using right now is Notebook LLM. So you can take a text and now turn it into a podcast. But now then, how do you flick that maybe into a game as such? And indeed, we've seen this with Twitch.
Right.
We've seen this with the esports.
Right.
Okay, we know that it can be done, but there are questions there about the IP, definitely. Wonsun, did you?
So, obviously there were a couple of things I was thinking before, just that my head doesn't really seem to be organized. So it actually ties both of your questions together. So the trend in the project markets has been that more Europeans or Americans, in that case, who are trying to co-produce with Asia or other minority countries have been more culturally sensitive. And it's a cultural sensitivity to both race, but also sex. Mm-hmm. So I'd be asked by both the director and producer, do you think this representation is okay of such nationality or a woman? So I feel like that's changed because I haven't really abundantly experienced this until recently. So that's an interesting change, I think, coming from Europe towards Asia or Middle East or Africa.
Definitely. In fact, I'd love to be back here next year and hear maybe what impact that's having if that change is rolling forwards here. Now, we have been tasked with this panel, as you can see on the slide here, is to think about how can we inform and create a future framework for European growth. No easy challenge, okay, but something that I'd love us to start to get into a little bit here. So thinking about this, in your opinion, and thinking about European production, IP, the creators, the content, the platforms, everything that's out there, what should we start, stop, and continue doing? Okay, so we're going to try and use this framework, start, stop, continue, for the short term, mid-term, and long term. Does anyone of you want to dive in and go first? Maybe Sander.
Happy to do it. There's also a couple of
oh, yes. You brought
slides
some slides
that were brought on, so if you can bring those up. But yes, that's something that I think there's several components that I think are important when we think about generating or creating the next generation IP in Europe. And it all starts with capital. If you look at the legacy today, how legacy IP was created, it was very much reliant on public funding. You know, on average, 26% comes from public funding, another 17% comes from different incentives, tax incentives, etc. So there's a high dependency on public funding today in generating and creating the legacy IP. And how you create the next generation IP is you become market-driven, and those investments become market-driven. What does it mean? You're participating in YouTube's $31 billion every year that they're generating revenue. They're sharing 55% of that with all the creators. That's a pool that you can participate. Or somebody like Netflix, who's generating $32 billion every year. And similarly, it's a subscription market that you can be part of. So becoming market-driven is the way that you create next-generation IP. Then, if we go to the next one, this one doesn't seem to be working, but if you just click through to the next one, the important part is development. Today, it's very much author-centric, and it's very much still led in the old world of, there's a boardroom of people who decide what gets made and what doesn't get made. But it's been a long time that markets work that way. Nobody's able to, guess what works. And therefore, those who are building with audience-first mindset are very much data-led. The YouTube creators have had, for 15 years, second-by-second analyses of what works for their audience and what doesn't work for their audience. Implicit signal, but they're also getting explicit signal, things people like and don't like and comment on and share, and what creates conversations. That they've been incredibly data-led and having audience-centric mindset in their mind when they're developing their shows, rather than relying on a handful of people in a TV executive board or fund boards to make those decisions.
And real-time data as well.
It's all real time. It's immediate. It's not like I'm going to wait for a report or a questionnaire somewhere, and it's implicit. It's what people do. Then in terms of formats, the formats have also evolved, where very much the legacy IP is generated or created in traditional first formats. They're built for TV shows and cinema and theatrical releases. The next generation IP is built on digital first formats. This is where people already spend more of their time. It used to be that 90% of the population goes to the cinemas. Now, on average, worldwide, less than 10% of the population goes to the cinemas. So ignoring those innovative digital-first platforms means that you're neglecting majority of the population and the young, especially the youth who's up and coming on those platforms. And that is equally, for them, the core defining way of consuming. When you look at content distribution side, legacy IP is generally built on local theatrical distribution. That's still generally the requirement, the first window of release. And when you look how next generation IP is built, it's built on global platforms that are pan-European. If you think about, in general, like the foundations of European values and European storytelling, who do you think has contributed most to the common culture in Europe? These are the 1, 2, 3, 4 top streaming platforms in every country. Even like before, we heard the report of Estonian top streaming platforms being locals. This is actually far from the reality. The reality is that YouTube is absolutely a de facto #1 in every single European market. #2 in every single European market is TikTok. #3 is Amazon Prime Video. Number 4, generally, then you might start seeing first local platforms like Join in Germany or Canal Plus in France or some of the local platforms in Estonia. And even those platforms are not available for me. So if I want to see the Join show, I want to see the Canal Plus show in Estonia, I don't have access to that. But this is the opposite mindset of Netflix. When they released Barbarians, which is a German show, it became #1 show in 18 European markets at the same time. So it created our share of voice, common culture, and common stories that we were sharing. So they were doing more for the culture. And same with YouTube. When somebody posts a show in France, we all know about that show that the YouTuber was making there. Because yes, in theatrical release in France, he got 300,000 viewers to go in, but he got 10 million views on YouTube.
Yep. Within the first 8 days.
Within the first 8 days. And that was the incredible story that we were all following. So if we want to have a pan-European shared culture, global platforms are the way to build the next generation IP. And last but not least is innovation and large. Very much, legacy is driven by this risk-averse mindset, which is very natural, very human. When new technologies emerge, new distribution platforms emerge, we face them with resistance and fear and regulation, which is common. But at the same time, we see that the next generation IP is actually built on those new mediums and oftentimes technology-driven. Those breakthroughs are technology-driven. And you could obviously look a ton of examples from that space, even when you took something like, let's say, GDPR, that had a large impact on the content and IP space. Like only now, 6 years later, we got a report that was giving us kind of like the post-mortem of what happened. What happened was the power of centralized, large technology platforms increased. The power of small, independent players decreased. The profits of the small and medium-sized technology companies decreased by 15% based on the last European competitive report by Mario Draghi. So there's a huge work to be done in, yes, the good intents that we have when we introduce regulation, but then what happens afterwards, doing a post-mortem not in 6 years, but maybe 6 months to course correct, and in order to become more innovation friendly. So that's the framework, kind of one slide to take away on how do you build the next generation IP.
And I think we can all go home now.
So, Sander, thank you. So you've given us, in this one slide here, your sort of like your starts, and you've told us also about your stops there also. Grace?
Well, I mean, seriously, my points connect to what Sander's saying. And I think from a European perspective, what's becoming so evident from the speakers that, were previous to us is that we need to stop relying on legacy systems in how we finance media and how we distribute and market. This, we are looking at innovating and shifting to perhaps cloud-based workflows, streaming-first strategies, again, what Sandra said, and, digital marketing is very much part of creating an audience connection. So this is something that we really need to start and continue with.
Now, something that strikes me listening to you both as well, and from a little chat we had earlier backstage, is the sort of legacy approaches from a national perspective or a collection of nations, whereas the next generation is from the individual, no matter where they are. As you said, like Netflix kind of sort of targeting everyone out there.
Can I just say something about that? There's a risk that we all sound like technocrats here, right? But we're not, right? I'm not. Masanda may be a little bit there. But it's really important to remember, in a room, we need to have cognitive diversity, right? We need to have the technocrats. We need to have the storytellers. And we need to have the business strategies. These things must come together, because I think we are in silos right now. And I mean, very still institutionalized thinking, and we need to break that.
Wonsun.
So what I'm about to say is directly contradicting myself from earlier statement, but so the filmmakers have become sensitive to culture and gender, but at the same time, because they want to co-produce with certain countries, they will plug in the elements of that specific country when it doesn't even really fit the story. And I've been encountering a lot of these examples for the past year, and the story absolutely does not work. And so I think that is something that actually it goes for Koreans too. Koreans, whoever wants to, co-produce with Europe or America, they would just plug in the character and the setting because they think it works, but it doesn't. So that's one example of what not to do. And then I know I keep telling you the game changer aspect of things because I don't think it's really easy to define the game changer in the most successful or unsuccessful way, because I think most of the episodes that I'm about to share actually share the process rather than the end result. So one of the newest trends would be the Indian filmmakers inquiring about Japanese IP. And the reason why is because I think they're running out of Korean films to remake, and for a good reason, right? And they've seen Korean examples of adapting Japanese literatures into successful films, because average Korean would know famous Japanese authors. Like if you ask them on the street, they will know. So Japanese literature has always been very deeply rooted in our culture, as well as, I think, Taiwan. And so now they're interested in looking into Japan for inspiration as such. So I just was in TIFCOM before going to Manila. I met with all the 6 major publishers, and we're trying to hammer out the number for me to bring back to India, like in 2 weeks, or actually tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. And these are really expert salespeople who've been in the business for decades, and they know everything. And we could not bang out a number. We couldn't even come close to like a ballpark figure for me to take back with me, because they hadn't even thought about doing any business with India.
Okay.
And there hasn't really been a collaboration between the two. So that's another game-changing trend. Sorry to go back and forth.
Well, no, it's a game-changing trend, but in fact, thinking about the framework for European, maybe there's something that we can take from that and say, okay, there needs to be this ability for us to take our content that we have and then to transfer that IP across into remakes for different cultures or even different generations. I mean, because a lot of what we're talking about here is also generational. You know, how are we, if we're thinking about the future 3, 5, 10 years, we need to be thinking about the generation alphas also, and how they're going to be consuming content, and what they're going to be ready to buy tickets for, to invest in. Maybe.
Another wish that I had was, I was talking to Japanese government organizations, and we were complaining because Korea and Japan are deemed as sort of affluent countries, and we're not really eligible to apply for many of the public fundings in Europe. And the filmmakers are having extremely hard time, even though Korea and Japan both have our own public funding, but it's very minimal. And so we were jokingly saying that we're going to form a coalition between Japan and Korea and maybe North America, who's the same, to give fundings to only these countries specifically.
Interesting.
So what I'm wishing is that the European funds would consider including Korea, Japan, and North America.
Okay. There's a question when we think about frameworks, we think about the policies, the mechanisms, the funding, all of these, the reports. What about the leadership in the innovation? What needs to change in the leadership and what we need to build into the framework for the future of Europe? Sander.
I think that's key, that question in driving change. I think there's lots of learnings that we can see from history. I think most technological shifts that happen in our lives follow same pattern. I don't think necessarily that history repeats itself, but it certainly rhymes. And often, almost all new technologies are faced with fear and resistance. And that's a natural behavior that comes from, Daniel Kahneman has got this prospect theory or loss aversion theory, which means that when people are faced with challenges or difficult decisions, they often feel the pain of losing something much stronger than the pleasure of gaining something. That's why a bronze medalist winner often feels more joy than the silver medal winner, because the silver medalist just lost something while the bronze medalist just won something. And even if somebody gave you the bet of, let's say, here's 100 euros, and there's a 50% chance you're going to double it to 200 euros, and there's a 50% chance that you lose 20. Most people would not take that bet. for their life. And that's the mindset that often most new technologies are approached with. Not just on leadership level, but us as human. It's a natural behavior. And then when we start adopting those new technologies, it comes through the phases of, we're going to do the same thing as before. So you see it already happening in film. First we introduce AI regulations. There's a bunch of fear-mongering going on. And then the second phase is like, we're going to only use AI for the same things that we did before. We're now going to make movies, but using these generative tools. We're going to generate songs. We're going to generate images. We're going to just use it as a Google search engine because we don't know better. That's kind of the familiar, safe way of adopting something. But only the new things in our lives and in the world are unlocked when we start experimenting and creating that fertile ground for innovation. And that's when we redefine mediums. That's when companies start hiring their heads of AI and heads of mobile and heads of digital, only to get to the place where that doesn't matter anymore because industry has completely transformed. Like we have completely new mediums of consumption. So take, for example, like radio or television. When that shift happened, the first show, first of all, it was faced with resistance. Like TV's going to take away all of your family time. We're going to lose communication skills. People have no social life anymore. It's dangerous. And then, of course, some of them might have become, true to some extent. But then at the same time, when TV was starting to be adopted, we were just using it for radio shows. Just single camera, two people talking, that's it. There was no visual storytelling. But you really need that leadership to drive the fertile ground for innovation rather than faced with fear and resistance, actually build a safe environment to innovate. And that's what will ultimately unlock those new value and new possibilities. Otherwise, you will just be missing out or following on once those changes have already happened.
Sandra, thank you. There's a lot in there, but I think a very clear message. Grace, your perspective.
I think what's dangerous is when we are in such a very powerful, paradigm shift technologically, and leadership is lagging, right? And I fear that we have lagging leadership when it comes to the audiovisual industry in Europe. What is Europe? Europe, we are individuals. And I see, what needs to happen, in my opinion, is a focus on decentralizing leadership, taking away these traditional hierarchies. We have a lot of gatekeepers on national, regional, domestic, local, company, private enterprise, public organizations that are stopping innovation and growth, that are, living, what my favorite phrase right now is intellectual incest. So we're working in our echo chambers, and it's costing peace, it's costing resilience, and it's costing security.
Wonsun.
I think the ultimate dialogue right now in the more creative side of the film industry would be between producers, festivals, and investors. Because the gap between what the festival and the critics consider as good films are very far away from when it actually reaches audience. And even investors, even if you're just doing as a philanthropic work, you have to get something in return in the end. And nobody's getting anything in return because it's just too unrealistic. And I think part of the problem is that certain festivals have project markets, and they select the projects themselves, the festival programmers, rather than having a separate selection committee of producers or consultants or other project market or industry personnel. And that actually limits the type of projects that are selected for that market only to be available for festivals. So I think that also really needs to be changed in the industry, that bridging the gap of what constitutes as a good film, I think, is the dialogue that we're having at the moment. I know this might not be the end result or the answer that you're looking for, but like I said, I feel like everything that I'm saying in relation to my industry or our industry is very, the process, like nothing is really fixed. And
I think this is why it's important, and I love that you bring this up, and that from Sander we've heard sort of about the executive mindset that needs to change, similar thing from Grace, but also thinking about, sort of where the audience is, and then you're bringing in this festival element, and that's a part of the ecosystem. It's still an integral part of the ecosystem, and we need this cross-ecosystem change in order for that to, the framework to actually hold. One of the things that we need to think about as well is that as we move forward then currently, as you rightly said, Grace, we're a collection of individuals, but even individual countries. How do we all move forward in a way that's cohesive? We don't have some racing forwards and taking the benefits, that we're able to actually create something that is European. And festivals, I still think, hold quite an important role within there. What has worked, and what do we think we need to continue doing in order to try and create some more cohesion there? Any of you had any thoughts and ideas? Festival, as Wonsun's brought to the stage.
Well, continuing with festivals, when I left CJ, I'm no longer under the corporate umbrella. And then when you're alone, you need a shielding system of some kind. And I feel like there were certain festivals and markets that provided me that home. And then Rotterdam was exactly that. I'd like to thank Mahjarj, the former director of Cinemart, because I always felt really welcomed at Cinemart and IFFR Pro. And Stan, of course, has been a great inspiration too, because he left the Black Knights Festival as a programmer around the same time as I left CJ. So we had been in touch all these years trying to make each other grow. And without Stan, I have zero knowledge in AI and AR, VR. Actually, speaking of AI, VR, AR, so Asian countries, the festival industry programs have been better with presenting AI cases. And Sander was one of the speakers for Busan last year. And this year, we had a spectacular AI conference at Busan. But the funny thing is, when I ask producers if they use any of these tools, nobody has begun using them yet. I asked why, and they're still skeptical. They're not very 100%, even though I thought one of the tools that was presented in Busan was spectacular because it basically takes away your line producer's work entirely.
Okay. All right, so we're coming into our final couple of minutes here, and I want us to try and sort of wrap up what we've put out there as the future, those emerging trends, but then also possibly as the framework through. So we've seen this sort of the crossing across the platforms. We've heard about the role of AI and moving from generative to the sort of the agents out there. Sander gave us that slide as a framework. Grace, you talked about, and I'm picking up on a number of different things here and trying to smush them all together. But the fact that we need to be thinking about, sort of that collectively, but also as individuals, and how is the IP moving across these platforms as well? The Grand Theft Hamlet was your example here. But then I think also the leadership, the element that comes in. And I'd like to link that through to the finance panel that we did earlier also. Sort of the leadership, the mindset change, but events like this and festivals also. So I want to thank you all.
Yeah, I just want to say something very quickly, just connecting to the 3 pillars of the Talent Digital Innovation Summit, security, resilience, and innovation. And if I flip this to a soft instrument, when I think of security, I think of trust. When I think of resilience, I think of peace building. And innovation is us, we're people, right? And we have been talking about these frameworks, these concepts that have brought us here today. But inside these frameworks is the biggest question, and that is, what is our whys? What is it that is going to be important? What is our whys? And this is something that we really need to answer together, and building, constructive stories, peace building, and hope, actually, together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Grace, Wonsun, and Sander. And effectively, we can also look out to many of the other digital industries that are going through these changes and have gone through these changes and pull lessons to create a great framework for Europe from there also. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand the stage back to Sten. Thank you.